You will be shocked to learn how female hysteria was treated in the Victorian era. We imagine the Victorian era as a time of elegant ladies, strict gentlemen, and technological progress. But behind this facade lay a world in which women's status was extremely unenviable. Any display of emotion, disagreement with one's husband, or simply a desire for self-fulfillment could lead to a terrible diagnosis: female hysteria. This diagnosis was a universal label that doctors applied to any woman whose behavior did not fit within the narrow confines of social norms. Everything fell under the category of hysteria, from anxiety and insomnia to a passion for reading novels and a desire to get an education. The methods of treating this ailment are striking in their strangeness and sometimes border on the absurd. We will delve into the world of Victorian medicine, where logic gave way to prejudice. This is a story about how society tried to control women under the guise of caring for their health. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn what simple household device, which is found in almost every home today, was originally invented by doctors as a medical device for treating hysteria. What I am about to tell you has long been hidden behind the beautiful name, treatment by rest. At first glance, what could be better than complete rest prescribed by a doctor? The patient was relieved of all household duties, put to bed, and forbidden from any excitement. But in practice, this treatment turned into real isolation. The woman was forbidden to get up, read, write, or even talk without permission. She had to spend 6 to 8 weeks in bed, completely cut off from the outside world and social life. The author of this method was the renowned physician Silas Weir Mitchell. He believed that mental activity depleted the female body, and the only way to restore strength was to turn the patient into a passive object. Any intellectual stimulation was strictly prohibited. Nutrition was another important part of the treatment. Patients were force-fed high-calorie foods, mainly milk and fatty meats. It was believed that this helped them gain weight and restore the nervous energy lost due to excessive stress. This method was especially popular for treating women from high society, those who showed signs of independence, intelligence, or creative ambition. Thus, under the guise of caring for their health, they were simply returned to their prescribed passive role. The psychological state of the patients was of little concern to anyone. Complete isolation, sensory deprivation, and lack of control over their own lives often led to worsening depression and anxiety. But these were considered merely symptoms of ongoing hysteria. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts. What do you think about how attempts to control and suppress personality were hidden under the guise of care? Let me know in the comments. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how ordinary water became a tool for treatment? In the Victorian era, hydrotherapy was considered a panacea for many diseases, and female hysteria was no exception. Doctors believed that exposure to water of a certain temperature and pressure could calm an excited nervous system. The methods were varied. One of the most common was dousing with cold water. The patient could be forced to stand while buckets of ice water were poured over her, or a powerful jet from a hose was directed at her. It was believed that the shock of cold water would reset the nervous system. This was supposed to distract the woman from her imaginary ailments and restore her clarity of mind. The effectiveness of this approach was, of course, highly questionable. Another popular procedure was prolonged bathing. The patient could be placed in a bathtub filled with cool water for several hours. Sometimes she was even covered with wet sheets to prevent her body from warming up. The purpose of these procedures was to induce fatigue and submissiveness. Doctors of that time sincerely believed that physical exhaustion contributed to moral healing. Weakened by the cold, the patient became more compliant and less prone to hysterical manifestations. There were even entire sanatoriums and hydrotherapy centers where nervous ladies were sent. There they underwent a course of various water treatments, which were more like endurance tests. This was considered a respectable way to get rid of an inconvenient relative for a while. Why do you think such obviously ineffective methods were considered effective for decades? But what if I told you that for centuries, doctors believed that the cause of all women's problems was an organ that literally wandered around the body? I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of ancient medicine, which seems completely absurd today. The roots of the diagnosis of hysteria go back to ancient times, to the ideas of the ancient Greeks. The word hysteria itself comes from the Greek hystera, which means womb. Ancient doctors, including Hippocrates, believed that the uterus was not a fixed organ, but a kind of living creature inside a woman. They believed that it could move freely around the body, and it was this wandering that caused the symptoms of hysteria. According to this theory, if the uterus remained unsatisfied, that is, if a woman did not have children for a long time, the organ began to miss something. In search of moisture, it could rise up the body. This journey supposedly caused all the problems. If the uterus rose to the chest, it caused difficulty breathing and a feeling of suffocation. If it reached the head, it led to headaches and dizziness. In essence, any symptom could be explained by the movement of this restless organ. The idea seems wild, but it persisted in medicine for almost 2,000 years. Even in the Victorian era, many doctors were still influenced by this ancient theory. Although anatomy had already proven the immobility of the organ, the idea of its influence on female behavior remained. The treatment methods based on this theory were no less strange. The main task was to force the uterus back into its rightful place. To do this, they used a carrot and stick approach. Although in the 19th century, doctors no longer spoke directly about the wandering womb, the very idea that the source of women's problems lay in their reproductive system remained dominant. The diagnosis of hysteria became the modern heir to this ancient and erroneous theory. What if everything you were taught about the benefits of sport had a completely different, hidden meaning in the Victorian era? Among other strange prescriptions for hysteria, horse riding stands out. Doctors recommended it as an excellent remedy for strengthening the nerves and improving mood. At first glance, this seems like perfectly reasonable advice. Physical activity in the fresh air is indeed beneficial. However, Victorian doctors attached a slightly different, specific meaning to this recommendation. They believed that the rhythmic shaking a woman experiences in the saddle has a beneficial massaging effect on the pelvic area. In their opinion, this helped to relieve nervous tension, which was considered one of the causes of hysteria. In essence, it was a veiled form of vibration therapy. A special device was even invented for this purpose, imitating riding a horse. The device, called the Chamberlain, was a saddle mounted on springs that created the necessary vibrations. It was advertised as a home exercise machine for maintaining women's health. High society ladies enthusiastically followed these recommendations. Horse riding was not only fashionable, but also a pastime approved by doctors. It allowed them to escape from stuffy drawing rooms and feel a sense of freedom. But even here, we see women being treated as mechanisms that can be tuned with the right amount of shaking. What other physical methods were used to calm women? And what were they prescribed to eat? In the next chapter, you will learn what therapeutic diets of that time consisted of. Nutrition played a huge role in Victorian medicine. Doctors believed that food directly affected not only physical, but also mental health. Therefore, special, sometimes very strange diets were developed for hysterical women. The general principle was simple. Food should be as bland and tasteless as possible. It was believed that spicy, hot, or simply tasty food excited the nervous system and provoked hysterical fits. Women were supposed to eat simple, calming food. The diet included porridge cooked in water, boiled vegetables, lean meat, and puddings. Any spices, sauces, and seasonings were strictly prohibited. Such a diet was supposed to not only calm the body, but also instill humility in the patient. One of the most radical methods was the milk diet. The patient was instructed to consume nothing but milk for several weeks. Milk was considered an ideal, pure food that cleansed the body and calmed the passions. Such diets were often combined with the treatment by rest that we have already discussed. A woman confined to bed received only bland and monotonous food. This was part of an overall strategy to suppress her will and vitality. For patients, such a diet was yet another ordeal. Monotonous and tasteless food exacerbated their depressed state. But complaints about food only confirmed the diagnosis. After all, a hysterical woman is always dissatisfied with something. Ultimately, therapeutic diets were part of the overall system of pacifying women. They were deprived of the small joys of life, one of which was delicious food. This was supposed to make them more submissive, quiet, and convenient for those around them. What happened behind the closed doors of wealthy Victorian homes was often resolved in one simple way: by sending the woman on a trip. If a woman showed signs of hysteria and her behavior became inconvenient for the family, she was often prescribed a change of scenery. It was an elegant way to get rid of the problem. It was believed that travel, especially to countries with warm climates, had a beneficial effect on frayed nerves. A trip to the waters of Baden-Baden, wintering in Italy, or a cruise on the Mediterranean Sea were all popular medical prescriptions. Of course, only very wealthy families could afford such treatment. The idea was to distract the woman from her worries. New experiences, beautiful landscapes, and the measured rhythm of resort life were supposed to drive painful thoughts out of her head. It was a kind of psychotherapy through geography. However, this method had a downside. By sending a woman on a long journey, the family isolated her from her usual circle of friends. This was especially convenient if her hysteria manifested itself in a violation of social decency or uncomfortable statements. Often, a woman was sent on such a trip accompanied by a companion or doctor. These companions were supposed to not only entertain the patient, but also monitor her behavior. In essence, it was a gilded cage, just a very large one. Do you think this practice can be considered a form of treatment? Or was it simply a form of exile? But what if the cure was sought not in a change of location, but in a direct influence on the mind? In the next chapter, we will delve into the mysterious world of hypnosis. The second half of the 19th century was a time of flourishing interest in hypnosis and so-called animal magnetism or mesmerism. These mysterious practices, balancing on the edge of science and mysticism, became a popular method of treating hysteria. One of the main proponents of this approach was the famous French neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot. Charcot worked at the Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris and turned his lectures into theatrical performances. He publicly induced his female patients suffering from hysteria into a hypnotic trance. Before the eyes of an astonished audience, the women demonstrated various symptoms: convulsions, paralysis, and loss of speech. The doctor claimed that in a state of hypnosis, he could both induce and remove these symptoms through suggestion. In his opinion, this proved that hysteria was psychological rather than physical in nature. His demonstrations were incredibly popular and attracted doctors from all over Europe. The process of hypnosis itself was shrouded in mystery. The doctor used hand movements, a fixed gaze, and a monotonous voice to put the patient into a trance. It was believed that in this state, her subconscious mind became open to suggestion. With the help of hypnosis, doctors tried to reprogram the behavior of their patients. They suggested to them that their symptoms would disappear, that they should be calm and obedient. It was an attempt to directly intervene in the human psyche. However, Charcot's methods also attracted a lot of criticism. Some believed that the patients were simply playing along with the famous doctor, intuitively understanding what he expected of them. Others feared that hypnosis gave the doctor too much power over the woman's personality. Despite the controversy, hypnotherapy became a fashionable method of treatment. It was attractive because of its mystery and the promise of quick healing without medication or unpleasant procedures. Many doctors opened private practices where they treated nervous ladies with hypnosis. Among those who studied under Charcot was a young Sigmund Freud. It was his observations of hypnotic sessions that led him to the idea of the existence of the unconscious. He later abandoned hypnosis in favor of psychoanalysis. But his first steps in studying the psyche were taken here. The history of hypnosis in the treatment of hysteria is an important stage in the development of psychiatry. It showed that the cause of suffering may lie not in a wandering womb, but in the depths of the mind. At the same time, however, it demonstrated how vulnerable and dependent on the doctor the patient became. In addition to physical methods, Victorian medicine developed a psychological approach to the treatment of hysteria: moral governance. This method was especially popular in private clinics and sanatoriums, where women with nervous disorders were placed. It was based on the idea that hysteria could be cured through strict discipline and re-education. The patient was removed from her familiar family environment, which was considered the source of her problems. In the clinic, she entered a world governed by a strict routine. Every hour of her day was scheduled: waking up, prayer, breakfast, occupational therapy, walks, bedtime, all on the hour. The main goal was to break the patient's will and force her to obey the rules. Any manifestation of hysterical behavior, tears, arguments, refusal to eat, was severely punished. Punishments could include isolation, deprivation of privileges, or additional unpleasant procedures. Doctors and staff acted as strict but fair mentors. They were supposed to become an authority figure for the patient, whom she did not dare to contradict. It was believed that by learning to obey in the sanatorium, a woman would be able to control herself in everyday life. Work therapy was an important part of moral management. Patients were forced to do monotonous and repetitive work, sewing, embroidery, gardening. This was supposed to distract them from their painful fantasies and accustom them to useful activities. Entertainment was also strictly regulated. Only moralistic books were allowed to be read, calm music listened to, and pious conversations held. Anything that could stir up or excite the imagination was forbidden. In essence, moral management was a form of psychological pressure. It was not aimed at helping women understand their feelings, but at forcing them to behave correctly. Complete obedience and the absence of complaints were considered criteria for recovery. This method reflected the general Victorian ideas about upbringing. It was believed that firmness, discipline, and suppression of emotions were the path to a healthy and virtuous life, and these same principles were applied to medicine. For many women, staying in such institutions was a difficult ordeal. They found themselves completely at the mercy of the staff, deprived of the support of family and friends. Instead of help and sympathy, they received drill and constant control. Moral governance is another example of how society's desire for control was hidden under the guise of treatment. Women were not treated, but corrected, conforming them to the strict standard of the ideal Victorian lady, quiet, submissive, and without an opinion of her own. We have come to the most delicate and perhaps the most famous method of treating hysteria. Victorian doctors believed that one of the causes of female nervousness was a collection of fluid in the uterus. To alleviate this condition, they developed a procedure called therapeutic pelvic massage. The purpose of this massage was to bring the patient to a state that was referred to in medical texts of the time as hysterical paroxysm. Doctors believed that this state brought immediate relief and relieved nervous tension. After the procedure, women did indeed feel calmer and more relaxed. The procedure was purely medical and was performed by a doctor in his office. It had no romantic or intimate connotations and was perceived as standard physical therapy, such as heating or inhalation. Patients regularly visited the doctor to receive their treatment. However, this method had a serious drawback for the doctors themselves. The procedure was tedious and time-consuming. The doctor could only see a few patients a day, and the demand for such treatment was enormous. This problem stimulated engineering thought. Doctors began to look for a way to mechanize the process and make it more efficient. The first such device was the manipulator, a steam-powered mechanical apparatus invented by American physician George Taylor. But the real revolution came with the invention of British physician Joseph Mortimer Granville in the 1880s. He created the world's first portable electromechanical vibrator. Initially, this device was bulky and intended exclusively for use by doctors in their offices. The invention was a huge success. It significantly reduced the time required for the procedure and allowed doctors to see many more patients. Vibrating devices became an integral part of the equipment of any doctor working with nervous women. Over time, these devices became more compact and affordable. At the beginning of the 20th century, they appeared in catalogs of household goods. They were advertised as a universal tool for massaging any part of the body, relieving fatigue, and treating many diseases. Thus, a device originally created as a purely medical instrument to solve a specific female problem gradually entered everyday life. Its medical origins were forgotten over time. This is a striking example of how technology born within the framework of a specific theory can find completely new applications. This story shows how mechanistic Victorian doctors' approach to women's health was. They sought a simple physical solution to complex psychological and social problems. And in the process of this search, they accidentally created a device that outlived both the diagnosis itself and the theories that gave rise to it. Victorian-era pharmaceuticals were the Wild West. The lack of strict controls led to the emergence of a huge number of patented remedies, or tonics, that promised to cure all diseases. And of course, there was a whole industry of women's tonics designed to combat hysteria, melancholy, and other nervous ailments. The composition of these mixtures is shocking today. Very often, their main active ingredient was alcohol. Some sedatives for women contained up to 40% alcohol, which made them stronger than many modern liqueurs. It is not surprising that after taking such a medicine, a woman felt more relaxed and happy. However, this was not a cure, but simply intoxication. Many women, without knowing it, became addicted to their sedative drops. Another popular ingredient was opiates. Laudanum, an alcohol tincture of opium, was sold in pharmacies without a prescription and was considered a universal pain reliever and sedative. It was generously added to mixtures for women's nerves. These substances effectively relieved symptoms of anxiety and depression, but were highly addictive. A woman who started taking such a tonic very soon could not do without it. It was a vicious circle from which it was very difficult to escape. Advertising for such products was very aggressive. Newspapers and magazines were full of advertisements depicting exhausted, suffering women who were miraculously transformed after taking another bottle of the elixir. The advertising emphasized that it was every woman's duty to be cheerful and pleasant to her husband. In addition to alcohol and opiates, tonics could also contain other dangerous substances. Some mixtures contained cocaine, which at the time was considered a safe stimulant. Others included bromine, which suppressed the nervous system. Doctors often prescribed such remedies themselves or created their own recipes. They sincerely believed in their effectiveness without fully understanding the long-term consequences. Pharmacology as a science was just beginning to emerge. Thus, the treatment of hysteria often boiled down to simply suppressing symptoms with powerful substances. Instead of solving the problem, women were simply disconnected from their experiences. It was the easiest and most dangerous path. The female tonic industry is a dark chapter in the history of medicine. It shows how commercial interests and scientific ignorance can combine to profit from human suffering. Behind the beautiful labels and promises of healing lay addiction and ruined health. We have looked at only 10 of the strangest methods of treating female hysteria, but there were many more. This story is not just a collection of amusing medical curiosities. It is a mirror reflecting deeply rooted prejudices in society about the role and nature of women. The diagnosis of hysteria was a convenient tool for control and suppression. It allowed any form of female protest, talent, or simply individuality to be declared a disease. And the treatment was aimed not at helping, but at returning women to the narrow confines prescribed for them. Fortunately, times have changed. Advances in psychology and women's struggle for their rights have led to the diagnosis of hysteria being officially removed from medical classifications. Today, we understand that behind the symptoms that were previously attributed to a wandering womb were real problems: depression, anxiety disorders, and simply the inability to live a full life in a repressive society. Please suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. History is full of surprising and little-known facts, and we are happy to explore them for you. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes.